Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are, and welcome to this Techstrong learning experience brought to you by PrismaCloud. My name is Cody, and I'm the host of Techstrong Learning, and we have an exciting presentation ahead. Before we kick things off, I do have just a couple of housekeeping notes to review. First, today's session is being recorded. So if you miss any of our discussion, perhaps you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend, the on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our session today. Now, if you'd like to engage with us, you can do so on the right side of the screen. The first option is the chat tab, and I'd like you to start warming that up for us right now by letting us know from where you are joining today. Directly to the right of the chat tab, we will have there's the Q&A tab. Go ahead and send in any questions you might have there. If we aren't able to get to your question today on the air, we will make sure that we send them over to our sponsor, and they will respond to them after the program concludes. And of course, before we close out today, we are giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So be sure to stick around for the duration of our conversation today. Our topic is the state of cloud native security in 2023. And I'm joined today by Bob West, Chief Security Officer at PrismaCloud by Palo Alto Networks. So Bob, thank you so much for joining me today. I'll now invite you to turn on your webcam and join us on screen.
Thank you for tuning in. This is Bob West. I'm Chief Security Officer for Palo Alto Networks PrismaCloud division. We've recently completed the State of Cloud Native Security Report. And what I'm going to do today is give you a briefing and hope this is valuable for you. So let me give you a little bit of background about the report. We surveyed over 2,500 cloud security and DevOps professionals, anywhere from chief executives of companies to developers to security technicians. We covered several geographies. We surveyed people from the Americas, Europe, Asia, and we covered multiple industry sectors from energy and utilities, financial services companies, healthcare, technology, and media and telecommunications. You'll have an opportunity to download the full report after this is completed. And let's go into cloud migration trends. So why are organizations migrating to the cloud? Well, first of all, they're building new and expanding existing products and services. They're increasing their efficiency and agility. So think of going back 3 years ago or so at the start of the pandemic. Organizations needed to almost overnight shift into working remotely for a good percentage of their employees, and having the ability to shift, not just in terms of events that impact us, such as that, but the expansion of companies entering new markets, et cetera. There are different processes and workflows that are associated, not just in terms of operating in the cloud, but in terms of running their core business. So that's been another driver. One of the main things that organizations need to take into account are their business and regulatory risks. So think of economic risk, geopolitical risk. We have the conflict in Ukraine right now, which is something that a lot of organizations need to take into account, not just in terms of operating in Eastern Europe, but also the cyber threats that are associated with the conflict. And finally, expanding into new markets. And transitioning to the cloud is something that really facilitates all of those different categories. There's a number of things that are associated with the transition to the cloud. One of the things that we see is more than half of the cloud workloads are hosted in public clouds, and this is consistent across all the regions around the world. We expect an 11% increase in workloads moved to the cloud in the next 24 months. Just to give you some additional statistics that aren't on this slide, at the beginning of the pandemic, about 30% of companies had more than half of their workloads in the cloud. And so we've seen a significant acceleration in moving to the cloud. So by the end of 2 years from now, we'll be at about 70% of companies that are operating in the cloud, more than half of their workloads operating in the cloud. And then if you break down the different categories of environments, 36% of them are PaaS and serverless, 22% are virtual machines, 18% are CAS, and 18% are containers. So reasonably even distribution across categories. And the application environments and deployment methods are consistent. 36% of organizations lift and shift their applications, and there's a variety of reasons for that. One of them can be just a general sense of urgency to get to the cloud. We've had customers that have gotten short notice that their data centers are being shut down. And so there's a number of reasons why organizations are lifting and shifting. 27% of them are refactoring or rebuilding their applications, and 37% of them are taking the time to re-architect their applications to be cloud native. And if you look at the different methods for application deployment across global regions, 40% are building net new applications that are built in the cloud in the Americas, 34% in Asia Pacific and Japan, and 34% in EMEA. So what does this mean for different stakeholders? So for a cloud architect, cloud migration means utilizing a mix of application migration methods, anywhere from lift and shift, where we're talking about refactoring and building applications in cloud native environments. More than 70% of respondents expect the number of PaaS and serverless environments to increase over the next 24 months. For a developer, it's the integration of security into the DevOps environment. One of the things that we like to communicate is that it's difficult, if not impossible, to retrofit security into the development lifecycle, especially when you're working with DevOps, where there's a much higher frequency of deploying applications. Code deployment frequency has increased by 67% over the past 12 months. We don't see that changing. And for a security professional, this means that they need to be much more agile and really understand what's the migration trend, what's the frequency of migration, what's the architecture and tech stacks that are being used to deploy and run applications in public cloud environments. And ultimately what that means is that they need a new set of tools to protect the environment. It's not so much that there's a difference in terms of how you protect information in public clouds. It's just that legacy tools are not designed to protect multi-cloud environments and public cloud environments. So I was alluding to the fact that there's a change in application velocity or moving applications into the cloud. 77% of respondents are deploying new or updated code into production on a weekly basis. And that contrasts, if you think of legacy applications, they were more than likely changes to applications being done perhaps on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis. So implementing changes or deploying new applications on a weekly basis is much, much faster. 38% are committing new code daily, and 17% of them are deploying new or updated code multiple times a day. It's just a radically different frequency in terms of deploying code. Security in a developer workplace, well, where there's developers and there's a much higher ratio of developers to security people, has some challenges in it. So 68% of respondents reported an increase in deployment frequency. 64% reported an increase in lead time for changes. And ultimately what this means is that security professionals, number one, are taxed, and they need to make sure that developers really understand what it takes to integrate security into their applications and into the development environment. Historically, when you talk about using application testing tools, developers had multiple screens, so they would be developing on one screen and testing on a second screen. And that makes life for a developer more challenging. So the ideal scenario is that you have security tools integrated into the native development environment. Let's talk about the top 5 challenges of moving into the cloud. So there's technical complexity, right? If you think of traditional environments, they're complex to begin with, and most organizations have dozens, if not hundreds, of applications they rely on to do their job. They have platforms that they're using for development, and it doesn't become less complex when you move to the cloud environment, especially if you're moving to the major platforms such as Amazon or Microsoft or Google, Oracle, et cetera. You don't have control over it. You have multiple workloads and containers that are operating in those environments, and you don't have 100% control over those environments. So you really have to understand what are the cloud service providers doing, and what's the delta, and what do you need to be doing as an organization to protect that environment. I think there's a lot of organizations that have the misunderstanding that if they're moving to the cloud, they don't need to protect the environment. And the reality is as an organization, you still have the responsibility for protecting information. And especially if you have a multi-cloud environment, the ideal scenario is you're using one set of tools to manage the entire environment. And so that's one of the tenets, is really try and understand the environment and then reduce complexity as much as you can. The other thing is that there's a lack of talent across the world. So right now, there's several million positions that are open that can't be filled in the security world because there simply aren't enough people to go around. And so you need to start thinking more creatively. This reminds me a lot of Y2K back in the day, where all the resources were redirected to addressing Y2K, and there was a really significant shortage of talent. So we started looking at who are the smart people that exist, who have the desire and capacity to learn, and so we invested in education in a very broad context, and that's how we filled the gap. I see something similar happening now, but you can't address the issue overnight. You also have to be thinking comprehensively in terms of how you protect the environments. Again, it's not that different from traditional infrastructure and traditional applications. You need to be thinking about things holistically, and really then understanding what are the tools and process and people that I need to protect a multi-cloud environment. Lack of visibility is another issue. And again, legacy tools are not architected to protect information in the cloud. So you really need to have a good feel of what's happening across the cloud environments you operate in as a business. And if you understand what's happening in those environments and there's unusual activity, then you can address those issues. If the converse would be, if you don't have visibility, there's not much you can do. And the final thing is meeting compliance requirements. If you're operating not just in a global environment, but even in several countries or one country, there's a number of regulatory requirements across most industries. And having the right operating environment to address those compliance requirements is what you need, but that's particularly challenging. So what are the obstacles to cloud adoption? One of them is, the number of tools that organizations have. Back in my CISO days, we had a buy, hold, sell list that we managed. So what are the tools that we need right now? What are the tools that are aging? And what are the tools that we need to buy on a go-forward basis so that we can continue to protect the environment? The more tools that you have, the more complex and the more challenging it is to protect the environment. So as an example, the major cloud service providers have very good sets of native tools. But if you take the approach of using native tools, over time it becomes impossible to protect the environment consistently. Things fall through the cracks. And so reducing the number of tools as much as you can is one of the goals. 77% of organizations have a challenge in terms of understanding what security tools are necessary to achieve their objectives. Part of it is a function of environments changing. And the other part is there's always new tools that are coming to market, and they're coming to market because the security challenges change over time. I think back to when I started in security in 1995, the big challenge that we had once we connected to the internet was people defacing websites. So it was a nuisance, but it wasn't something that had material impact on the business. We're operating in a completely different environment where we have ransomware attacks, we have nation states that we need to care about, organized crime. Those are the big things that we have concerns about. And so really understanding what tools are necessary to protect environments holistically is something that is critical. 76% of respondents said that the number of cloud security tools they use create blind spots. So having the right tools to protect the environment is something that's critical. So as I was talking earlier, we have the challenges in terms of moving to the cloud. One of the things that we need to address in terms of providing comprehensive protection across multi-cloud environments is really to holistically manage security across teams, across environments. And one of the things when you think about protecting information, one of the core goals is to manage human behavior. And there's a number of different constituents in enterprises, from the board of directors to leadership teams to people that are managing infrastructure to developers to the security team. And so really understanding what is everyone's role in protecting information becomes critical. Security needs to be developed, needs to be integrated into the development lifecycle. One of the analogies I like to use is manufacturing. So when a car rolls off the assembly line, you don't say, let's add quality now, right? It's a function of the manufacturing process. And if you don't have the right level of quality, you start having defects, which lead to recalls. And while recalls are expensive and they take up a lot of time, the really big damage is to brand and reputation. And in a similar context, integrating security up front is the goal. It's close to impossible to retrofit security into applications after they've been implemented. People need to be trained in terms of what they need to do on a day-to-day basis to protect an organization. And one of the key things, especially for technical people, is really understanding how do they use security tools. You have to have visibility across cloud resources. Again, going back to if you don't know what you have and you don't understand any unusual activity, it's very hard to address it. So lack of visibility is a significant challenge. And ultimately, finding the right tools to address security needs in a multi-cloud environment is one of the challenges that organizations have. As I was saying earlier, legacy tools don't protect cloud environments. And so you really need to be thinking about what tools do I need to protect cloud environments as I transition into cloud native environments. And ultimately, as a consequence of all the changing environments, 90% of organizations can't detect, contain, or resolve cyber threats within an hour. So think of what that means, especially in the aggressive threat environment that we're operating in right now, especially, I just don't see ransomware going away, for example. And if you can't respond to one of those incidents within an hour, you're not only losing time, but you're losing your ability potentially to continue to conduct business and generate revenue. And so that's what organizations are dealing with. And so why don't we take a look in terms of what are the top 5 factors that organizations should be thinking about when they choose security tools. First of all, ease of use is number one. I was talking about the shortage of talent. And if you don't have people that are really deep in security, you need to compensate for that by making sure that tools are easy to use. The other benefit of ease of use is as you hire people, the training window becomes shorter and they can become productive. And step into a role and begin to use security tools and protect their environments. We're looking at best of breed capabilities in a very broad context. So historically, people have looked at individual tools to solve problems. So you've got to be looking at not just best of breed capabilities, but how can I have, as I was talking about earlier, as small a set of tools as possible and the best tools. So combine that with ease of use is the ideal scenario. We need to be thinking about what's the impact security tools have on performance. So if you've run technology infrastructure at all, you want to minimize the number of agents as an example, or the number of tools in a very broad context, because ultimately they take a toll on performance. So you really need to understand, how can I minimize the impact of security tools? Most organizations have relationships with a small set of vendors. And so when they're making decisions, organizations will default to vendors that they're familiar with. And finally, pricing is one of the things that organizations think about. You obviously have to get a good deal, but it's much more important to go with best of breed and ease of use than competitive pricing. And it's not to say that competitive pricing isn't important. It's just, for most organizations, that's not the highest priority. It is obviously important to manage cost, but competitive pricing is the least important thing of the important things, if that makes any sense. Application environments and deployment methods are remaining consistent. When we spoke to the 2,500 people that we did during the survey, 78% of the respondents want better day one security from tools. So think of when you're implementing legacy security tools, it takes a given period of time to implement them. If you're implementing cloud native tools, the implementation window is much shorter. And in many cases, you can begin to get benefit from those tools. We also took a look in terms of, so what are what's the short list of issues that you need to address? So we talked about visibility. We talked about regulatory compliance. There's the notion of governance over the number of security tools and technology that you have to use. Identity and access management is another critical component of protecting information. So this is one of this is a short list of the tools that you need to use to protect cloud environments. Ultimately, collaboration is one of the things that's critical to protect not just cloud environments, but environments in general. 80% of organizations reported that security professionals are embedded in their DevOps teams. I would argue that given the scale, the ideal scenario is that security people should be spot checking what developers are doing in DevOps environments. And that's the way you're going to scale, right? We spoke about the shortage of people. And if you can teach developers, number one, how to code securely, and if they have the tools integrated into their development platforms, that's the ideal scenario. And ultimately, the security team, if there aren't enough people to go around and integrate them into the DevOps environment, then they should be spot checking the applications and workloads and containers that are implemented into cloud environments. 16% of organizations reported that their cloud security teams are greater than 30 people. So that ultimately, if you flip that, it means 84% of organizations don't have large teams, and as a consequence, they need to be very efficient. 75% of the respondents said that they have a higher than usual rate of turnover in their DevOps roles. And there's a number of factors for that. Number one, there's a shortage of technology people in general. And there's just a lot of organizations that are paying very, very well. They'll move from one company to another. Another factor for developers moving from one organization to another is the fact that they have a lot of complexity in what they do And so keeping the development environment as simple as possible is one of the factors that will allow organizations to attract and retain their developers. So what's the path forward? So 80% of the respondents said that they would benefit from a centralized security solution. The cloud has fundamentally changed the way organizations develop, deliver, and secure applications. And going back to the principle of the smaller set of tools, the easier it is to protect a large, complex environment. So that's one of the keys, one of the key takeaways from this. So we have 5 recommendations for protecting cloud environments. The first one is embedding security earlier in the application development lifecycle. I was talking earlier about the analogy of quality and making that a priority for manufacturing companies, because if you don't have the right level of quality, then you start having costs from defects and recalls. In a similar context, having security integrated from day one will allow organizations to implement their applications or workloads and containers into cloud environments with as few security issues as possible. You're never going to get rid of all security issues, but if you integrate security from day one, it's going to help reduce the risks. And one of the things I like to communicate is every organization is going to have a security issue, but the goal is to have it be a brush fire instead of a 5-alarm fire. And so integrating security into the development lifecycle is one of the key things that can help minimize security issues. Having visibility across multi-cloud environments and not just having it be a snapshot in time, but having continuous visibility will allow organizations to understand who is accessing systems, what are they doing, when are they doing it, and where is it happening. And if you have as close to real-time visibility across cloud environments and you understand unusual activity, then you can take measures to address the issues that you identify. The third recommendation for protecting cloud environments is to adopt threat prevention techniques that allow you to address security issues in public clouds. So if you have the right tactics in place, the ideal scenario is that you can block zero-day attacks. And if you can block zero-day attacks, it means that you're going to minimize the amount of lateral movement that the bad actors make when there is a breach. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And really doing what's commercially reasonable to protect the environment is the ideal scenario. You have to have a combination of preventative techniques in place. So again, going back to preventing zero-day attacks is certainly one of the things that you want to do as an organization. One of the things that becomes really important is managing identity, and in particular, making sure that as you provision identity for people, workloads, and containers, that they have the right access so that workloads and containers can function properly, that people have a minimum amount of access so they don't have excessive permissions, but they do have enough access to do their jobs. And managing identity ultimately is one of the things that is going to help organizations prevent ransomware attacks, for example, or minimize the damage is probably a better way of saying it, because there will be attacks. And one of the goals of the attackers is to either escalate privilege in accounts or take over accounts that have administrative rights. So managing identity is one of the key things that you need to do. Alignment with both business and technology strategy is another key tenet for having a successful cloud implementation. When I put together my strategies back in my CISO days, the first thing I wanted to do is understand where was the business heading, what are its strategic goals, and the second thing I wanted to understand is what are the strategic goals for the technology organization. So if you understand where the business is going and the technology organization is going, then you can define a clear strategy for protecting information. And protecting cloud environments is a subset, but an important subset of that journey. The ideal scenario is you want to understand what's happening in the next few years and then determine what's the suite of tools that you need to protect the environment adequately. And the final thing that you need to do is consider the consolidation of tools. There's some organizations that are running in an optimal state, but that's a very small percentage of organizations. As I was telling you earlier, in my CISO days, we were managing buy, hold, sell lists. And so really understanding, what do you have? Who are your key vendors? Is there an opportunity to reduce the number of tools and vendors as much as possible? That's how you're going to succeed as an enterprise in protecting an environment. The other thing that is important and is related to consolidating tools is looking at the underlying process. How do you automate process? And if you do that, then you're going to be able to minimize the number of people that you have to protect the environment across the enterprise, across multi-cloud environments. If you're not familiar with PrismaCloud, this is what we do. We protect code as it goes up to the cloud throughout its journey. We have a set of tools that allow you to have continuous real-time visibility. We take a prevention-first approach. So we have the latest buzzword bingo term that's shift left. We were talking about integrating security up front, and that's what this set of tools allows you to do. And as a consequence, because we have a set of cloud-native tools, we allow organizations to scale relatively easily. We operate on the principle of having a comprehensive set of tools that allow you to protect code to cloud throughout its journey. So let me finish up with these takeaways. Complexity is the enemy of protecting information. So reducing the complexity in an environment as much as possible is one of the significant goals. Deployment frequency has increased, and as a consequence, security really needs to be integrated as tightly as possible into the development process and implementation of infrastructure. And if it's done properly, it allows organizations to accelerate their journey into the cloud. Protecting information in multi-cloud environments or in one cloud, public cloud environment is a shared responsibility. As an organization, you need to understand, what is your cloud service provider doing? What's the delta? And then you need to make the decision in terms of acquiring the tools you need to protect the environment. You know, this has to be a collaborative effort, not just across the teams within your organization, but collaboration is required with the cloud service providers. So understanding what clouds you're using, what the cloud service providers are doing to protect the environment, and what you need to do is critical. We spoke about consolidation of security vendors, keeping the number of vendors and the number of security tools to a minimum is going to allow organizations to successfully transition into the cloud. And then finally, we spoke about multiple tools. So do I have more than one tool that's serving the same function? Do I have overlap in sets of tools? So really understanding what's my security tool portfolio, minimizing the number of tools, which ultimately minimizes the amount of complexity and allows organizations to protect their environments at an optimal level. So thank you so much for tuning in. I hope this was helpful and hope to see you real soon again. Take care.
All right, Mr. Bob West, thank you so much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure having you on Techstrong Learning. I'd like to remind our audience that our session was recorded. So should you want to rewatch or share this one, you will be receiving this link via email. It's where you'll be able to access our on-demand. You can also find it living on the Security Boulevard website at securityboulevard.com/webinars, and just be sure to look in the on-demand section. The 4 winners of our $25 Amazon gift card drawing were Bosjan K, Clifton O, Rajni P, and Janet B. So to our 4 winners, congratulations. Keep an eye on your email inbox to claim that gift card. It should make its way over to you in the next 48 hours, but if you don't happen to see that email, check your spam folder just in case it gets filtered out. I'd like to thank PrismaCloud for sponsoring our program today. And to everyone who has joined us, thank you so much for being here. If your question went unanswered, we're going to make sure to send that back over to Bob, and so he can hopefully get back to you in a post-webinar email. Otherwise, we do hope to see everyone back here with us on Techstrong Learning for a future program. We do also ask that you just stick around for 1 extra minute for a survey that will pop up as soon as we close out. So we'd love to hear your feedback, or if you have any suggestions for upcoming programs, please leave them in that survey as well. Thanks so much for joining, everyone, and you may now disconnect. Bob, thank you once more.